The courtroom was in chaos. Papers flew, voices shouted, and the judge slammed his gavel, trying desperately to restore order. It was as if the very air in the room had changed, thick with tension. Usher stood in the center of it all, his figure tense and unwavering, holding a small, unassuming envelope that would change everything. A sharp breath escaped from the defense lawyers' lips as they looked at each other nervously, aware of what was about to unfold. In the front row, a group of journalists whispered frantically, phones already poised to capture every moment. The camera crew for the live broadcast shifted uneasily, their lenses trained on Usher, waiting for him to speak. The tension in the air was palpable. This wasn't just another courtroom drama. This was a turning point. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need your attention," the judge bellowed, his voice booming across the room. "We will now proceed with the presentation of evidence from the prosecution. Usher, please present your materials." Usher stepped forward, his calm demeanor masking the storm of emotions brewing inside him. This was it. The moment he had been preparing for, the moment that would either destroy him or free him from the weight of the truth he had carried for so long. He held up the envelope, sealed, innocent-looking. But inside was a recording that could change everything. "What if Monique actually said this?" someone whispered from the back of the room. Usher barely noticed. The atmosphere was electric, crackling with the unknown. Rumors had been swirling for weeks, and now, everything was about to come to light. Allegedly, the contents of this tape would finally reveal what everyone had suspected but no one had been able to prove. As he approached the stand, Usher's fingers trembled. He cleared his throat. The courtroom fell silent. "I'm not here to destroy anyone," Usher began, his voice steady but low. "I'm here to tell the truth." A ripple ran through the room. The defense lawyer raised an eyebrow, clearly ready to pounce on any misstep. But Usher didn't falter. He had made his decision long ago. The truth would come out, whether they were ready for it or not. He glanced at the gallery. His fans were there, watching in disbelief. Some believed in him. Others had doubts. And then there were those who speculated, what's his game here? Is he seeking revenge? Many fans believed that Usher had been backed into a corner, pushed by forces beyond his control. Yet there was also a sense of conviction in his posture, something raw and vulnerable. Usher pulled out the envelope, holding it carefully between his fingers. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier as the defense team shifted uncomfortably. They had been preparing for this moment, but no one could have predicted it would come this way. Usher's decision to bring forth this evidence was a calculated risk. He knew there would be consequences, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was doing the right thing. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. The judge's warning felt like a distant echo. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Usher's thoughts echoed in his mind, but he didn't speak them aloud. The cameras were rolling, and millions were waiting to see what happened next. His eyes locked on the judge. "Your Honor," Usher said, breaking the silence, "I'm about to present a recording that allegedly involves the defendant, Diddy." There was a collective gasp. The room seemed to collectively inhale, and for a moment, it felt as though the world outside the courtroom had frozen. The famous mogul, Diddy, known for his wealth and power, had long been seen as untouchable. But now, his empire was on the brink of collapse. Allegedly. The tape that Usher was about to unveil was not just a simple scandal, it was a dark secret that had been carefully hidden for years. Usher's heart pounded as he placed the envelope on the table before the judge, his gaze fixed on it like it was the key to his own salvation. There were whispers. Rumors suggest that the contents of the tape would expose Diddy in a way no one had ever imagined. Some even said the tape was doctored, that it was an elaborate setup. But Usher was certain. This was the truth. "What's in that tape?" the prosecutor asked, leaning forward with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Usher took a deep breath and slowly spoke again. It shows the defendant in a compromising situation. The events on the tape speak for themselves. The prosecutor's eyes widened. The defense lawyer, already on his feet, moved quickly to object. Objection, Your Honor. We request that this tape be excluded. It's irrelevant. The judge, trying to regain control, slammed his gavel once more. Sustained. The court will consider the evidence, but only if it is directly relevant to the case at hand. But Usher was resolute. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to back down now. He wasn't just fighting for justice, he was fighting for redemption, for the truth to be revealed no matter the cost. In the gallery, whispers spread like wildfire. Many fans believe that Usher had been holding on to this secret for years, unsure of when, or if, it would ever be the right time. But now, it was all coming to a head. The courtroom was no longer just a place of legal proceedings. It had become a battleground for truth, power, and reputation. The defense lawyer's voice rose again, attempting to divert the court's attention. Your Honor, this is a public spectacle. We are being asked to consider something based on rumors and unsubstantiated claims. But Usher's words, though quiet, were powerful. This isn't about rumors, he said, his voice breaking through the noise. This is about something that's real. Something that's been kept in the dark for far too long. His words echoed in the silence that followed. And with that, the door was opened. Whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The storm inside the courtroom may have been just beginning, but Usher's mind wandered back to a time when things weren't so complicated. A time when his biggest concern wasn't the weight of a world-shattering secret but simply how to make his next hit song. As the courtroom drama unfolded, his thoughts drifted to the very first steps of his journey, the moments that had shaped him into the man who stood at the center of this chaotic whirlwind. Usher Raymond V had always known he was destined for something big. Born in Dallas, Texas, he grew up in a world that wasn't always kind. Raised by his mother, Jonetta Patton, after his parents' divorce, Usher had learned early on what it meant to fight for what you wanted. His early childhood wasn't easy, there were struggles, financial difficulties, and a constant need to prove himself. But from an early age, Usher's natural talent for singing and dancing became his escape. Music was his sanctuary. His mother recognized the potential in him long before anyone else did. When Usher was just 13 years old, she took him to an Atlanta talent show, where he caught the attention of a local music executive. The journey that followed was like a rocket launch, fast, intense, and relentless. By 16, Usher had signed with LaFace Records and was on his way to becoming one of the most successful R&B artists of his generation. Yet fame, as sweet as it was, came with its own set of problems. The brighter the spotlight, the darker the shadows that followed him. As his career soared, Usher faced the challenges that so many stars before him had encountered: pressure to stay relevant, rumors about his personal life, and, most significantly, the complicated relationships with those he trusted most. Usher's friendship with Diddy was one of those relationships that started out pure and evolved into something more complicated over time. When they first met, Usher was just a young artist trying to find his way in the industry, and Diddy, already a household name, became a mentor figure to him. The two worked together on projects, and Diddy's influence helped elevate Usher's career even further. But what started as mentorship soon became a tangled web of ambition, competition, and, at times, betrayal. Diddy had a reputation for being ruthless in business, a fact that Usher, like many others, had turned a blind eye to in the early days of their friendship. Over the years, rumors had circulated about Diddy's dealings, but Usher, always the optimist, had hoped that his mentor's darker side was nothing more than speculation. Then came the fateful night that changed everything. It was a summer evening in Los Angeles, and Usher was celebrating a major win, a Grammy nomination for his latest album. The night was young, and the mood at the party was electric. Champagne flowed freely, and laughter echoed through the room as Usher mingled with friends and fellow celebrities. But as the night wore on, Usher found himself alone on the balcony, gazing at the city lights, contemplating his next move. That's when Diddy found him. "Yo, you alright?" Diddy asked, his usual swagger softened by the quiet of the night. His voice carried the weight of someone who had seen it all, someone who had built an empire and wasn't afraid to protect it at all costs. Usher smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, just thinking about the future," he replied. "You know, what comes next?" Diddy leaned against the railing, his eyes scanning the cityscape. "The future's always got a way of sneaking up on you. You ready for it?" Usher chuckled. "I think so. But sometimes, I feel like there's more to this game than just music. Like we're all just playing a bigger part than we realize." Diddy looked at him, his eyes sharp. "Trust me, Usher. The bigger the game, the more you've got to be willing to sacrifice. This industry doesn't play by the rules. If you want to survive, you've got to learn to play dirty." The words hit Usher harder than he expected. He had always respected Diddy's business acumen, but hearing him speak so bluntly about the industry made him question everything he'd been told about success. Was it all about the art, or was there something darker lurking beneath the surface? The conversation stuck with Usher in the days that followed, and over time, he began to notice things he had once ignored. Diddy's influence was everywhere, on the charts, in the media, and in the lives of the artists he worked with. But there was something unsettling about how Diddy seemed to control every narrative, every move. Allegedly, Diddy's empire was built on more than just music, it was built on manipulation, power plays, and sometimes even threats. Usher's thoughts turned dark, and he found himself questioning his own role in all of it. He had always believed that he was different, that his music would speak for itself and that the art would be his legacy. But the deeper he got into the business, the more he realized that it wasn't always about the music. Then, the rumors started. It was a late night at the studio when Usher received an anonymous tip. Someone had seen something, heard something, something that involved Diddy. The details were sketchy at best, but the gravity of what was being suggested was enough to make Usher's blood run cold. Allegedly, Diddy had been involved in shady dealings, ones that went beyond the typical industry gossip. Whispers about blackmail, betrayal, and even illegal activities had begun to surface, and they were all pointing back to Diddy. For weeks, Usher ignored the whispers. He didn't want to believe it. Diddy had been his mentor, his friend. The thought that Diddy was involved in something dangerous seemed impossible. But then came the secret tape. It was a recording from an event that no one had expected, capturing a private moment between Diddy and a high-profile celebrity. Allegedly, the footage revealed more than just a scandal, it revealed a side of Diddy that was darker than Usher had ever imagined. The tape had been floating around for years, kept hidden by people who feared what it could do if it ever came to light. But now, Usher had the tape in his hands. That night, as Usher sat alone in his hotel room, watching the tape for the first time, he felt something shift inside him. The truth was there, in front of him, undeniable, unshakable. He had a choice to make. He could keep the secret and protect his career, his friendships, and his future. Or he could bring it to light and risk losing everything he had worked for. He didn't sleep that night. The decision wasn't easy. Usher knew that revealing the tape would destroy everything, their friendship, his career, possibly even his reputation. But deep down, Usher knew what he had to do. The truth was bigger than his fear. It was bigger than his loyalty to Diddy. So, standing in that courtroom, Usher wasn't just revealing a tape. He was revealing the painful truth he had kept buried for far too long. And once it was out there, there was no going back. The courtroom was still buzzing with the shockwaves of Usher's revelation. As the judge ordered a short recess, the once imposing silence was replaced by hurried whispers and frantic typing. The journalists who had been waiting for a moment like this rushed to file their stories, their phones flashing with new updates. The scandal was now official. The public would soon know the truth. Usher had just unveiled the darkest secret about Diddy, and it was more explosive than anyone could have imagined. Usher felt a sense of unease settle in his chest as he sat back down at the defendant's table. The weight of the moment hung over him, but it wasn't a burden he was ready to carry alone. He had made the decision to expose the truth, but now the ripple effects were just beginning. His lawyer, a sharp and experienced woman named Diane Richards, leaned in, her voice low but urgent. "Usher, are you sure you're prepared for what's coming next?" she asked, her eyes scanning the room. Usher's fingers drummed nervously on the table. "I don't think I have a choice anymore, Diane. I'm done pretending this isn't happening. It's time for the truth to come out, whatever the cost." Diane studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing as if calculating the consequences. "It's going to get ugly. The press will have a field day. And Diddy's not the type to back down quietly. If he fights back, this could destroy both of you. You might lose more than just your reputation." Usher swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. "I know. But I can't live with the secret anymore. I need to be honest with myself, and with everyone else." Diane nodded, but her expression was one of reluctant understanding. She had been through these kinds of battles before, and she knew how ruthless the media, and Diddy, could be. "All right," she said, standing up and straightening her blazer. "I'll make sure we're prepared for the fallout. But just remember, this is a fight you can't undo. Once it's out, it's out." Outside the courtroom, the world was already spinning out of control. The news broke within minutes, and social media exploded with theories, comments, and reactions. Fans of both Usher and Diddy flooded Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram with their thoughts. The hashtags #DiddyExposed and #UsherTruth trended worldwide. Allegedly, the tape had been in circulation for years, but no one had ever dared to bring it to light, until now. "What if Monique actually said this?" one viral tweet suggested. The post was filled with speculation about the real story behind Usher's decision. Some questioned whether Usher's move was personal, maybe a payback for some old grudge or betrayal, or if he was simply trying to protect himself. The rumors began swirling faster than anyone could keep up with. Across town, Diddy was watching the news break from his penthouse office. His face, usually so calm and controlled, was twisted with anger. He slammed his fist on the desk, knocking over a glass of whiskey. His assistant rushed in, visibly shaken. "Diddy, we need to respond to this, now." "I know what I'm doing," Diddy muttered, running his hand through his hair. His voice was dangerously calm, but the fury in his eyes was unmistakable. "That motherfucker has no idea what he started." The assistant hesitated, clearly intimidated by the storm brewing inside Diddy. "We can control the narrative, though. We can spin it, make it look like." Diddy cut him off, standing abruptly. "No. We end this. Now. I'm not letting Usher destroy everything I've built." As Usher prepared to return to the courtroom, his mind raced with possibilities. He had no idea how Diddy would react, but he had seen the mogul in action before. Diddy didn't take slights lightly, and Usher had just delivered the ultimate one. Diane returned to his side, her face grim. "The media's already got wind of Diddy's response," she said. "He's already starting to fight back. I'm hearing rumors that he's planning to publicly discredit you, say you've lost your mind." Usher's jaw tightened. He had expected as much. Diddy's playbook was known: attack, manipulate, twist the truth until it bent in his favor. But this time, Usher wasn't backing down. This wasn't just about him. This was about exposing the truth, even if it meant losing everything in the process. "I'm ready," Usher said, his voice steady but cold. "If this is how it's going to play out, then let's do it." Back in the courtroom, the tension was unbearable as the judge returned to the bench. The room had filled with a mix of anticipation and dread. Everyone knew that the day was far from over. Usher, now resolute, prepared to face whatever came next. The prosecution stood up first, their demeanor one of confidence. The lead prosecutor, a tall woman with sharp features named Helen Williams, was known for her tough stance. She addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, we would like to call Mr. Usher Raymond to the stand for further questioning," she said, her voice calm but cutting. Usher took a deep breath, his heart racing. As he stood to walk to the witness stand, he couldn't shake the feeling that every eye in the room was on him, watching, waiting for him to crack under the pressure. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. As Usher took the stand, the questions began. "Mr. Raymond," Helen began, her voice low and deliberate. "Can you confirm that you had prior knowledge of the contents of the tape before bringing it into court today?" "Yes," Usher replied, his voice steady. "I knew what was on it. That's why I'm here. I wanted the truth to come out. And the contents of this tape. Does it accurately reflect what was said and done by the defendant, Mr. Combs?" "It does," Usher said, his voice firm. "What's on that tape is exactly what happened. I'm not here to make up stories. I'm here because it's time for people to know the truth." The room fell silent. The weight of Usher's words hung heavy in the air. The audience, both inside the courtroom and watching at home, knew this was just the beginning. Outside, the storm was picking up. Diddy's camp was already strategizing, calling in top PR experts to manage the crisis. The tapes might have been out in the public eye, but Diddy wasn't going down without a fight. And Usher, for all his convictions, wasn't sure how far he was willing to go. One thing was certain, though, this wasn't just a court case anymore. It had become a battle for their careers, and perhaps, their very souls. The days following Usher's testimony were a whirlwind of headlines, social media posts, and speculation. The public's thirst for drama was insatiable, and every new piece of information only seemed to fan the flames. For Usher, it felt as if his entire world had been flipped upside down, and there was no escaping the chaos. The courtroom was just the beginning. What lay ahead was even darker and more unpredictable than he had imagined. Usher had always been the type of person to remain composed in the face of adversity. But now, with the weight of the truth, and the consequences of his actions, bearing down on him, he found himself questioning everything. He sat alone in his private studio, the dim light casting long shadows across the room as he reflected on the decision he had made. The music that had once been his escape now felt distant, like something that belonged to a different life. Diane Richards had warned him that things would only get worse, but nothing could have prepared him for the storm that was brewing. Diddy's response to the exposure was swift and brutal. Rumors spread like wildfire, many of them suggesting that Usher's motives were far from pure. Allegedly, Usher had been pushed to act out of jealousy or personal resentment, but the media narrative was already being manipulated in ways Usher couldn't control. What if Monique actually said this? One viral tweet suggested, speculating that Usher's motivations were rooted in a past betrayal rather than a desire for justice. The question lingered in the air as the media and fans alike tried to piece together the puzzle of Usher's relationship with Diddy. Many fans believed that Usher had been manipulated or even coerced into releasing the tape, as though he were some pawn in a larger game. And what if that were true? Was he being used in ways he didn't fully understand? But one thing was certain, Usher had never expected the storm to be this intense. The night before the next hearing, Usher's phone rang. He stared at the number on the screen. It was from an unknown caller, but something told him it was important. Hesitating for only a second, he answered. "Hello." A low voice crackled through the speaker. "Usher. I know you're scared. But you don't have to face this alone." Usher's heart skipped a beat. He recognized the voice instantly. It was Diddy. "What do you want, Diddy?" Usher's voice was sharp, but the tremor he couldn't hide gave away the fear that lingered behind his anger. "You think you've got me cornered, don't you?" Diddy's voice was laced with both menace and a strange calm. "But I've got more cards to play than you think." Usher's mind raced. What could Diddy possibly have on him? Hadn't he already laid it all out in court? You're playing a dangerous game, Usher. You think that tape is going to save you? Diddy continued, his tone chilling. The truth about me isn't the only truth out there. You have no idea what's coming for you. The line went dead before Usher could respond. The following morning, Usher arrived at the courthouse with a knot in his stomach. As he entered the building, reporters swarmed around him, shouting questions and taking pictures. The tension in the air was palpable. Usher was once the darling of the music world, beloved for his smooth voice and effortless charm. But now, with the public divided and the world watching, he felt more like a target. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was just as intense. Usher's attorney, Diane, briefed him quickly on the strategy for the day. We need to stick to the facts. No matter what Diddy tries to do, we can't let him distract us. You've told your truth. Now, we'll let the evidence speak for itself. Usher nodded, but his mind wasn't entirely focused. The cryptic warning Diddy had given him last night was gnawing at him. What did he mean by, more cards to play? Could Diddy really have something even more damaging? Usher had never been paranoid, but now, he couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. When the trial resumed, Diddy's defense team came out swinging. They were well prepared, casting doubt on the credibility of the tape and questioning the authenticity of Usher's claims. They suggested that Usher had fabricated the story as part of some personal vendetta against Diddy, the very person who had helped him climb to the top of the music industry. Usher's heart raced as he watched Diddy's lawyer, a slick man named Richard Hale, methodically dissect his character. What if Usher has been under pressure from others? What if someone's been pulling his strings? Allegedly, there's a pattern of Usher being involved in questionable business dealings in the past. Can we truly trust the testimony of someone who has been involved in such a high-stakes game for so long? The insinuations were subtle but powerful. The courtroom murmured, and Usher could feel the seed of doubt taking root in the minds of the jurors. Many fans believed that Usher had simply been a pawn in a bigger game, used and manipulated by others who stood to gain from Diddy's fall. The pressure was mounting, and the courtroom was becoming a battlefield, not just for justice, but for the future of both men's careers. Usher couldn't focus on the trial. His thoughts were elsewhere. He had no idea what Diddy was planning, but he knew that the mogul wasn't going down without a fight. And that fight wouldn't just be in the courtroom, it would spill over into every part of their lives. During a break in the trial, Usher's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. You don't know everything yet, Usher. But soon, you will. Prepare yourself. The message sent a chill down his spine. Who was this? And what did they mean by, you don't know everything? Usher showed the message to Diane, who frowned. We need to figure out who's behind this. If this is some sort of threat. I don't care about threats, Usher interrupted. I just want this over. But deep down, Usher knew that this was far from over. The truth was just the beginning. The deeper he dug into this web, the more tangled it became. And every new revelation seemed to pull him further into the abyss. That afternoon, Usher's fears were realized when a new piece of evidence was introduced in the trial, a recording from a meeting that took place just days before Usher had testified. The meeting was between Usher and a mysterious figure, someone who had been connected to Diddy in the past. Allegedly, this figure had warned Usher about what would happen if he exposed the truth. The tape was brief, but it was enough to shake Usher to his core. The person on the tape spoke in hushed tones, advising Usher to keep quiet, to let things go, or face dire consequences. The voice on the recording was distorted, but Usher could tell it was someone he knew. His stomach dropped. Had he been set up? Was someone using him to bring Diddy down, or was there something deeper at play? The courtroom buzzed with tension as Usher's face turned pale. This was no longer just about Diddy, it was about something far more dangerous. Someone was pulling strings behind the scenes, and Usher was caught right in the middle of a game he didn't understand. As Usher took a seat again, the weight of his situation sank in. The secrets were only beginning to surface. And the truth, as it often does, was far more complicated than anyone had ever imagined. The tension in the courtroom reached a fever pitch as the days wore on. Usher's mind was in a constant whirl of disbelief and confusion. What had started as a straightforward case of exposing Diddy's wrongdoings had become a labyrinth of secrets, threats, and shocking revelations. And now, as the trial veered into its final stages, the truth, like a ticking time bomb, was about to explode. It was the second week of the trial, and the defense had been relentless. Diddy's legal team had introduced even more explosive evidence, much of it centered on questioning Usher's credibility. Every day, a new bombshell hit the press. Usher had allegedly been financially unstable, was possibly under the influence of outside forces, and even his personal life, his relationships and friendships, were being put under the microscope. The goal was clear: discredit Usher, make him look like a pawn in a much larger game. But the most damning revelation was yet to come. As the courtroom sat in silence, Diddy's lawyer, Richard Hale, stood and moved toward the witness stand. His face was calm, but there was an unsettling gleam in his eyes. He addressed the judge, his voice dripping with a quiet intensity. "Your Honor," Hale began, "we have one final piece of evidence to present, a piece of evidence that will unequivocally prove that Usher Raymond is not the victim he claims to be, but rather a willing participant in a much more dangerous game." Usher's heart raced. He had no idea what they were about to unveil, but the way Hale spoke made it clear that this wasn't just another attempt at twisting the facts. Something big was coming. The defense motioned for the tape to be played. Usher's stomach sank as the room went dark, and the familiar hum of the courtroom's technology filled the air. The screen flickered to life. The first thing Usher noticed was the familiar setting, a luxury penthouse, the kind of place only someone like Diddy could afford. And there, sitting across from him, was the last person he expected to see, his longtime friend and former collaborator, Jermaine Dupri. Jermaine's face was a mix of concern and hesitation as he looked directly into the camera. The conversation that followed was one that Usher had never intended to see the light of day. "I told you, Usher," Jermaine said, his voice heavy. "If you're going to do this, you need to make sure you've got a backup plan. You can't just go around attacking people like that. Diddy's not gonna let you get away with this." Usher's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a casual conversation. This was a conversation about the exact moment Usher had decided to expose Diddy. It was clear that Jermaine, someone Usher had trusted, knew exactly what was happening. And worse, he was complicit in it. "Jermaine, you don't get it," Usher's voice echoed in the recording. "This is bigger than me. This is about the truth. People deserve to know what Diddy did. I can't just sit back anymore." Jermaine sighed, shaking his head. "I get it, but you're walking into a storm. You might not come out the other side in one piece. You know how powerful Diddy is. If you do this, it's not just a career that's on the line." "I don't care anymore," Usher had said in the recording, his voice hardening. "I'm doing this. It's already done." The tape ended abruptly, and the room was deathly silent. Diane, sitting beside Usher, clenched her jaw in frustration, her fingers tightening around the papers in her hands. Usher's mind was racing. He couldn't believe what he had just seen. Jermaine had been involved all along. His friend, his confidant, had he been guiding Usher toward this moment, knowing full well the consequences? The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He wasn't the victim here. He had been part of something much larger, something much more complicated than he could have ever imagined. The room buzzed with whispers as the footage played over again for everyone to see. Many fans believed that Usher had been manipulated, but this footage made it clear that Usher had chosen this path, with full awareness of what he was doing. There was no longer any doubt. He had made the decision to go after Diddy, and now, the world knew the truth. As the tape ended and the lights in the courtroom flickered back on, Usher's face was pale. He could feel the eyes of every person in the room on him, their gaze heavy with judgment. His mind felt like it was spinning in circles. He had never intended for this to get so out of hand. The truth he had exposed, about Diddy, about the tape, about his own role in it, was bigger than anything he had imagined. It was the type of truth that could tear people apart. Diddy's defense team immediately seized on the moment. "You see, Your Honor," Hale said, his voice sharp and filled with satisfaction. This wasn't about justice. This was about Usher Raymond's own vendetta, his own thirst for revenge. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he did it knowing the consequences. He set Diddy up, knowing full well what would happen. Usher felt the weight of the words sink in, like a stone being dropped into his chest. He was no longer the crusader for justice he had imagined himself to be. The media, the fans, the public, they were all now looking at him with suspicion. Was he really just out for revenge? Was the truth even worth it anymore? The prosecution's response was measured, but it was clear that they, too, had been caught off guard by the new footage. They had no choice but to proceed cautiously, trying to piece together a defense for Usher that would make sense to the jury. Later that evening, Usher sat in his hotel room, alone. The weight of everything that had happened, everything that had been revealed, crashed over him like a tidal wave. He had wanted to bring the truth to light, but now, he wasn't sure what that truth was anymore. He had trusted Jermaine, trusted his own instincts, but now he was left to wonder, was this all part of a larger scheme? Had Diddy been right about everything? His phone buzzed again. It was a message from an unknown number. "You're not the only one with secrets, Usher. Don't forget that." Usher stared at the message for a long time, his heart pounding. Who was behind this? Was it Diddy? Jermaine? Someone else pulling strings from the shadows? The game was far from over, and Usher could feel the walls closing in on him. Just then, a knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Diane stepped inside, her face weary. "We need to talk." Usher nodded, his mind still reeling. "What now, Diane? What do we do now?" Diane took a deep breath, her voice steady. "We fight. But this changes everything. It's no longer about just clearing your name. It's about surviving this." Usher's eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "I never asked for any of this. But I can't back down now." Diane met his gaze. "Then brace yourself. Because it's about to get even worse." And with that, the truth, once again, came crashing down. What seemed like a battle for justice was rapidly becoming a fight for survival. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days following the explosive courtroom revelation were a blur of media frenzy and endless interviews. The public's perception of Usher had shifted dramatically. Where once he was a celebrated artist, a respected figure in the music industry, now he was a man under suspicion. Every move he made was being scrutinized, every word he spoke twisted into something unrecognizable. Usher could feel the walls of pressure closing in on him from all sides. The once supportive fans had turned on him. Social media was awash with accusations, and the media painted him as a man driven by vengeance rather than justice. Allegedly, Usher had only exposed Diddy's secrets for personal gain, hoping to destroy the mogul's empire out of resentment. Rumors suggested that his entire career had been carefully crafted by powerful figures in the music industry, figures who now feared the ramifications of his defiance. Usher could feel the sting of betrayal, not just from Diddy or Jermaine, but from those who had once called him a friend. The whispers grew louder, and his own doubts began to creep in. What had he truly been trying to accomplish? Was the truth worth all of this? He stood in front of the mirror in his hotel room, staring at his reflection. A man who once had everything was now caught in a storm of his own making. He had wanted to expose a truth that had festered beneath the surface for years, but at what cost? He had sacrificed his reputation, his relationships, and perhaps even his own sense of self. His phone buzzed on the countertop, snapping him from his thoughts. He hesitated before picking it up, his heart sinking when he saw the name on the screen, Diane Richards. Usher. Diane's voice was steady, but there was a weariness in her tone. I think we need to talk. What's going on, Diane? Usher asked, his voice strained. Is it about the case? Or, is it about the next bombshell they're about to drop? Diane's pause stretched on for a moment. It's about the case, but more importantly, it's about what happens next. We need to figure out how to control the narrative. The public is already turning on you, and if we don't do something soon, it's going to get even worse. Usher's chest tightened. He had heard the whispers, felt the shift in the air, but hearing it from Diane, someone who had been by his side through thick and thin, made it all the more real. He was sinking, and the more he tried to claw his way out, the deeper the mud seemed to pull him down. I'm not sure I can win this anymore, Diane, Usher admitted, his voice raw with emotion. I never wanted any of this to go this far. I just wanted to do the right thing. But now it feels like the whole world is against me. My friends, my career, my reputation, everything I worked for is unraveling. Diane sighed. I get it, Usher. I know this isn't easy, but right now, we have to focus. The trial isn't over. The public perception isn't everything, what matters is what happens in that courtroom. Usher ran a hand over his face. He was tired. Tired of the chaos, tired of the lies, tired of not knowing who to trust anymore. How do we fix this? How do we undo what's been done? You can't undo what's been done, Diane replied gently. But you can take control of your story. We need to confront everything, head on. That means taking responsibility for your part in this, but also showing the world that you were doing what you believed was right. The truth isn't clean, but it's still the truth. Usher thought back to the courtroom, to the tape that had shattered everything. What if Monique actually said this? He wondered. What if he was wrong about his motivations all along? What if the pursuit of truth had only destroyed his life? These were the questions he'd been avoiding, but now, he had no choice but to face them. The next day, Usher and Diane sat down to strategize. The trial was winding to its conclusion, and the jury was set to deliberate in a matter of days. The pressure to present a solid defense, not just of his actions, but of his character, was mounting. Usher knew that without a dramatic shift in perception, the case could very well go against him. Diane was adamant. We need to humanize you, Usher. The jury needs to see that you're not just some disgruntled ex-employee or some bitter former friend. You're a person, someone who made a choice in the heat of the moment. And you need to show them that this was never about revenge. But Usher wasn't so sure. The public won't see it that way. All they'll see is a man who went after another man's empire, an empire he was once part of. They'll see betrayal, not justice. Diane shook her head. You can't control the public, Usher. But you can control how the jury sees you. If you're honest about your motivations, if you show them that this wasn't personal, they'll understand. That night, Usher stayed up late, reflecting on everything that had happened. He thought about the people who had supported him, Jermaine, Diddy, and everyone else in his orbit. What had they meant to him? Had he really been deceived, or had he simply been too blinded by his desire for truth to see the bigger picture? The line between right and wrong had become so blurred, he could hardly tell where it had once been. The following morning, Usher took the stand again, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. His eyes were clear, and his posture straight. This wasn't just about defending himself anymore. This was about owning his choices, regardless of how painful they might be. I never wanted to hurt anyone, Usher began, his voice steady but full of emotion. I didn't come here to tear anyone down. I came because I thought the truth needed to be told. What happened between me and Diddy was complicated. I was angry. I was frustrated. And I felt like I had been left behind. But the reality is, I was part of that world. I was part of the system that allowed these things to happen. And for that, I take responsibility. The room fell silent as Usher's words sank in. This wasn't the angry, defensive man the jury had seen before. This was someone owning up to his mistakes. I made a choice, Usher continued. I chose to expose what I thought was wrong, without fully understanding the consequences. I never wanted to be the villain in this story. I just wanted to make things right. But in the end, I know I hurt people. And for that, I'm sorry. The jury's deliberations began the following day, and Usher sat in his seat, his heart pounding. There was nothing more he could do. He had told his side of the story, and now it was out of his hands. As he waited for the verdict, Usher reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. He had started out as a man searching for justice, but in the process, he had found something even more important: clarity. The truth was not just about exposing others, it was about understanding oneself. And through it all, Usher had learned that the path to redemption was never easy. What had begun as a chaotic and painful journey was, in the end, a journey toward understanding, of others, of himself, and of the consequences of the choices he had made. And as the verdict loomed on the horizon, Usher knew that whatever happened next, he would face it with the strength he had gained through it all. The storm might not have passed, but he was finally ready to weather it. The courtroom was alive with tension as the jury filed back into the room. Usher sat at the defendant's table, his hands clenched in his lap, trying to steady his racing heart. Every person in the room seemed to be holding their breath. The air felt thick with anticipation, and the pressure was unbearable. This wasn't just about the case, it was about his life, his career, and his future. The judge entered the room, and a wave of silence swept through the courtroom. The jury took their seats, their faces unreadable, their hands poised over the verdict forms. The judge nodded, signaling for the foreman to stand. The foreman, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, cleared his throat before speaking, his voice carrying across the courtroom. Your Honor, we, the jury, have reached a verdict. Usher's breath caught in his throat, and his eyes flickered toward Diane. She gave him a small, reassuring nod, though the worry in her eyes was unmistakable. This was the moment of truth. Everything had led to this point, the tapes, the revelations, the media frenzy. Would it all come crashing down on him, or could he somehow emerge victorious? The judge motioned for the foreman to proceed. We find the defendant, Usher Raymond, not guilty of malicious intent against the plaintiff, Sean Diddy Combs. However, we find the defendant's actions to be reckless and without sufficient consideration for the consequences of his pursuit of truth. A murmur spread through the courtroom as the verdict was read aloud. Usher's heart pounded in his chest as the words reverberated in his mind. Not guilty. The relief flooded him, but it came with a deep sense of discomfort. He had won, but had he really? What did this verdict mean? The judge continued, her voice calm and deliberate. The court will order a settlement between the parties to address damages and other related claims. This case is hereby concluded. As the gavel came down with a resounding bang, Usher felt the weight of the moment. He wasn't completely free, there was still the matter of the settlement and the fallout from the media, but for the first time in a long time, the chains of uncertainty had loosened. He had survived the storm, but the world had seen a side of him he could never take back. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy erupted. Cameras flashed in all directions, reporters shouted questions, and microphones were thrust into Usher's face as he made his way toward the awaiting car. He had made it through the trial, but now came the hard part, reclaiming his life in the public eye. Usher. How do you feel about the verdict? One reporter shouted. Did you feel the pressure of the trial? Were you worried about what the jury might decide? Another asked. Usher raised his hand, signaling for them to give him space. He wasn't ready to answer their questions yet. He needed to breathe. He needed a moment to process what had just happened. Diane was at his side, ushering him quickly into the car as the reporters clamored for attention. Once inside, Usher exhaled deeply, his hands resting on his knees. He could still hear the reporters' voices echoing in his mind, the overwhelming pressure from the world pushing down on him. Diane sat beside him, her eyes focused, her mind clearly working through the next steps. "Well," she said, her tone pragmatic, "we did it. The worst is over. But we still have a lot of work to do. We need to control the narrative now. The public's perception has shifted, but it doesn't have to be permanent. You've got to speak your truth. Your real truth." Usher nodded slowly. His heart was still racing from the trial, but the initial shock of the verdict was starting to settle. He had expected to feel jubilant, relieved, but instead, he felt a sense of emptiness, as though the victory came at too high a cost. "I never wanted it to be like this, Diane," Usher said quietly. "All I wanted was to expose the truth. But now, I don't even know what the truth is anymore." Diane's gaze softened. "You did what you thought was right. Sometimes the truth isn't clean. But you've learned something important in all of this, you've learned the cost of seeking the truth. And that's something a lot of people never get to learn." Usher looked out of the window, watching the world pass by. The streets of the city seemed so ordinary, so unaffected by the storm that had raged around him for months. People were going about their daily lives, unaware of the chaos that had consumed him. The juxtaposition was jarring. He was still reeling, but the world kept moving. "Do you think anyone will ever see me the same again?" Usher asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I think the right people will," Diane replied, her voice firm with conviction. "And the others? They'll move on to the next scandal, the next headline. You can't control how they see you. But you can control who you are." In the weeks that followed, Usher made the difficult decision to step away from the media spotlight. He retreated to a quiet cabin in the mountains, away from the cameras and the constant stream of questions. It was a time for him to reflect, to recover, and to rebuild the parts of himself that had been shattered in the heat of the trial. He spent his days writing music, pouring his thoughts and feelings into songs that had been bottled up for too long. Music had always been his refuge, and now, it became his therapy. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that he had to rediscover the man he used to be, the man who had once found solace in his art, before the chaos had taken over. One morning, as he sat at the piano, Usher found himself staring at a blank sheet of music. The silence in the room was comforting, but there was still a lingering feeling of dissonance in his soul. He thought about his journey, the highs, the lows, the mistakes, and the triumphs. He thought about the trial, the public fallout, and the relationships that had been strained or severed. But most of all, he thought about the truth. What is the truth? He wondered. Is it the things we expose to the world, or is it the things we keep hidden? The truth, he realized, wasn't something that could be easily defined. It was complex, multifaceted, and often messy. It wasn't always clear who was right and who was wrong. The truth wasn't a single moment, it was a journey, a process. And Usher had learned that the hard way. By the time Usher returned to the public eye, months had passed. The media had moved on to new stories, new scandals, and new victims. But Usher had changed. He was no longer the young artist driven solely by ambition and the pursuit of fame. He was a man who had learned that the price of truth could be high, but that was a price he was willing to pay. In a press conference held in his own studio, Usher sat down, calm and composed. The room was filled with reporters, but this time, he was ready. He had prepared his statement, and he was ready to tell his side of the story, not to gain sympathy, but to make sure that, in the end, the truth would be his own. "I'm here to speak my truth," Usher began, his voice steady and clear. "What you saw in that courtroom wasn't just a fight against Diddy. It was a fight for my own sense of identity, for my right to exist in a world that often wants to keep secrets hidden. What happened between us was complicated, and yes, I made mistakes. But the truth I sought wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. And I've learned that accountability, like the truth, doesn't come without consequences. The press room was silent as Usher continued, his words measured but full of the weight of everything he had experienced. But I'm not defined by my mistakes, he concluded. I'm defined by my actions moving forward. And that's all I can control. As he finished speaking, Usher knew that this moment, this new chapter, was just the beginning. The storm might never fully pass, but he was ready to navigate the path ahead, one step at a time. The days that followed Usher's press conference were quieter than he had anticipated. The world, it seemed, had moved on, just as Diane had predicted. The media, always hungry for the next big story, had quickly latched onto new scandals, new controversies, and fresh headlines. But for Usher, the silence was louder than any press coverage. It was as if the entire world had held its breath, and now, as it exhaled, he was left to face the consequences of everything he had done and everything he had lost. Usher sat in his studio late one night, his fingers brushing against the piano keys, the soft melody filling the otherwise empty room. It was a routine he had adopted over the last few weeks. Playing music to soothe his mind, to quiet the doubts that still echoed in his head. The melodies, though simple, felt like they were the only thing that kept him grounded in the midst of the chaos. It was in these moments that he could reflect, not just on what had happened, but on what could still happen. His phone buzzed on the table beside him, pulling him from his thoughts. He picked it up, seeing a name that still gave him pause, Diddy. The weight of that name brought a lump to his throat. For so long, Diddy had been more than just a business partner. He had been a mentor, a friend, someone Usher had trusted. But now, Usher wasn't sure what they were anymore. The revelation in the courtroom had torn apart the foundations of their relationship, and no amount of time could rebuild what had been broken. But still, Usher found himself hesitating, his thumb hovering over the screen. What if this was a step toward healing? He wondered. He had spent so long running from the pain, from the discomfort of confronting the truth. Maybe it was time to face it head-on. With a deep breath, Usher tapped the screen, opening the message. Usher, I think it's time we talk. We both know what's been said and done. But there's a bigger picture here that we need to address. Call me when you're ready. The message was simple, and yet, it carried with it the weight of everything that had transpired. Usher had been expecting this message for days, maybe even weeks. He had been waiting for Diddy to make the first move. And now, here it was. The question was, what did it mean? Was this a chance at redemption? Or was it another round in a game neither of them had wanted to play? He placed the phone down and let out a long sigh. His mind raced with the possibilities. The truth he had fought so hard to expose was still out there, lingering in the air between him and everyone he had known. But the question now wasn't whether he could win or lose, it was whether he could forgive himself for the choices he had made. And more importantly, whether the people he had wronged could forgive him. Later that night, Usher found himself sitting across from Diddy at a small, dimly lit restaurant in the city. The place was quiet, the low hum of conversation creating an intimate atmosphere that seemed to mirror the tension between them. Both men were dressed casually, but there was an unspoken formality to the encounter. Neither of them knew how to begin. Diddy was the first to speak, his voice soft but laced with a heaviness that was hard to ignore. You know, I never thought we'd be here. I never thought it would come to this. Usher nodded, his eyes searching Diddy's face, trying to read the man who had once been his mentor, his friend. Neither did I. But here we are. The damage has been done. Diddy's lips pressed into a thin line as he leaned back in his chair. The damage, yeah. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what you were trying to do. But I get it. I get why you did it. Usher felt a knot form in his stomach. I never wanted to hurt you, Diddy. Not like this. But I thought the truth was worth it. I thought it was the right thing to do. And it wasn't, Diddy replied flatly, his gaze unwavering. But I get it now. I understand why you felt the need to expose it. There's a lot of things that were wrong, things that I've been trying to bury for years. I wasn't exactly playing the good guy in all of this either. I can't deny that. Usher was taken aback. He had expected anger, defensiveness, but not this, a quiet, almost resigned understanding. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Usher realized that Diddy wasn't just angry with him. He was angry with himself, too. I don't expect you to forgive me, Usher said after a pause, his voice low. What I did. I can't take it back. The damage is done. But I hope, someday, you'll understand why I had to do it. Diddy studied him for a long moment, the weight of his gaze heavy. I don't think forgiveness comes that easy, Usher. And maybe it shouldn't. But I do know one thing. We're both looking for redemption here. Maybe it's not about getting back what we lost, maybe it's about moving forward, no matter what happens. Usher swallowed hard, the truth of Diddy's words sinking in. He had been so focused on the battle, on proving himself right, that he had lost sight of the bigger picture. Redemption wasn't something he could seek from others. It had to come from within. You're right, Usher said quietly. I don't know what comes next, but I know I need to move forward. For me. Diddy gave a slight nod, his expression softening. I respect that. And maybe, just maybe, we both have to figure out how to move forward together. I don't know if that means going back to what we had, but I'm willing to try if you are. For a moment, the two men sat in silence, each processing the weight of their words. The past couldn't be undone, and the future was uncertain. But for the first time in a long while, Usher felt a flicker of hope. The truth had torn his life apart, but it was also the thing that could set him free. And perhaps, just perhaps, he could rebuild, not just with Diddy, but with himself. That night, as Usher walked back to his apartment, his phone buzzed once again. This time, it was a message from Diane. I know you just had that conversation with Diddy. But I want you to know something. This wasn't just about exposing Diddy or tearing down an empire. It was about you finding your truth. And now that you've done that, you're going to be okay. Usher smiled softly, looking out at the city lights ahead of him. Maybe the world wasn't perfect. Maybe the storm wasn't fully over. But he had taken the first step toward peace, toward healing. And that was enough for now. In the end, Usher knew that this was just the beginning of a new journey, one that was all his own. It had been a few weeks since Usher's conversation with Diddy, and though things between them were far from perfect, there was a palpable shift in the air. The bitterness and the walls that had once divided them had begun to fade, replaced by a quiet understanding. A silent agreement to not dwell on the past but to move forward. The healing process, however, was far from easy. It was slow, and it required patience from both sides. Usher had learned that the hard way. Now, as he stood on the balcony of his high-rise apartment, overlooking the sprawling city below, Usher reflected on the journey he had taken. The bustling sounds of the streets beneath him seemed so distant, as if they belonged to someone else's world. His world had been rocked to its core, and while the chaos had died down, the emotional echoes still lingered. The truth he had sought, the truth that had cost him so much, had changed him. It wasn't just about exposing secrets or righting wrongs. It was about finding himself in the process. Usher wasn't the same person who had walked into that courtroom all those months ago. He had grown, in ways he couldn't have anticipated, and though the road ahead was uncertain, he now understood one fundamental thing. The future didn't have to be defined by the mistakes of the past. Usher's phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. He picked it up, noticing the name on the screen, Diane. Hey, what's up? Usher answered. Hey, just wanted to check in, Diane's voice came through the line, calm and measured. How are you holding up? He leaned against the railing, staring out at the city as he spoke. Better than I was. The dust is settling. I've started working on new music, and for the first time in a while, I feel like I'm getting back to my roots. It's a good feeling, you know. Diane's voice softened. I'm glad to hear that. But there's something else, something you need to face sooner or later. Usher frowned, his stomach tightening with the sudden shift in tone. What's that? The public. The media might have moved on to the next big story, but that doesn't mean people have forgotten about you, Usher. There's still a lot of speculation, a lot of rumors about what went down in court. You know it's not over yet. Usher sighed, rubbing his temples. I thought it was. I thought I could just disappear for a while, lay low, and hope it all blows over. Diane was silent for a moment before responding. That's not who you are. You're not someone who hides. You face things head-on, and this is one of those moments. The world might be silent now, but they're still watching. It's time to control the narrative, not let it control you. Her words hit harder than he expected. Diane was right. He couldn't just bury his head in the sand. There would always be whispers, always be rumors. But it was his choice whether he let those things define him. He could spend the rest of his life in the shadow of this scandal, or he could step into the light and reclaim his story. The decision weighed heavily on him, but for the first time in a long time, Usher felt a sense of clarity. The battle for the truth had never been just about the world's perception of him, it had always been about how he saw himself. I get it, Usher said after a long pause. I've been running away from it, but it's time to stop. I'm ready. The following week, Usher called a press conference. The decision had been made. He wasn't going to let the whispers, the rumors, and the public's judgment dictate his life anymore. If people wanted to know the truth, they would hear it from him directly. The press conference was held at a small but stylish venue in the heart of the city. The media was buzzing, the excitement palpable. This wasn't just another celebrity announcement, this was Usher Raymond, ready to step into the spotlight again, not as a victim or a villain, but as a man who had taken control of his own narrative. When Usher walked into the room, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. The reporters who had once clamored to ask about his trial, his mistakes, and the scandal surrounding his name now stood in silence. There was no more confrontation in the air, no more accusations. This time, the focus was on him. Usher stood behind the podium, the weight of the moment settling in. He cleared his throat, then looked out at the crowd. It was time. Thank you for coming today, Usher began, his voice steady, calm. I know there's been a lot of speculation about my life, my career, and the events that unfolded in the courtroom. I've heard everything. I've read the rumors, the assumptions, and the judgments. He paused, letting his words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. But I'm here today to tell you all one thing, the truth is not as simple as it's been made out to be. What happened, what was exposed, was never just about me. It wasn't just about my fight with Diddy, or the consequences of revealing things that were meant to stay hidden. It was about facing the truth, no matter how hard it was to swallow, no matter how much it hurt. The room was silent as Usher's words sank in. The reporters, the cameras, the public, they were all waiting for him to explain, to shed light on the confusion that had clouded his image for so long. But the truth isn't just about secrets, he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. The truth is about who we are when we face the hardest moments of our lives. I've spent a long time running from my mistakes, from the things I thought defined me. But today, I stand before you as a man who's learned that what defines us is not what we've done, but what we choose to do with what we've learned. Usher took a deep breath before delivering his final words. I've made mistakes. I've hurt people. But I'm not asking for forgiveness. What I'm asking for is understanding. That we all make choices, and sometimes those choices lead us down difficult paths. But I'm still here, still standing, and still fighting to be the man I know I can be. I'm moving forward, and I hope that in time, you all will, too. As Usher stepped away from the podium, a sense of peace washed over him. The room erupted in questions, but he ignored them. His truth had been told, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt free. Later that evening, Usher sat in his apartment, looking out at the city below. The world was still there, spinning on its axis, and he was still a part of it. The chaos, the scandal, the fallout, it was all behind him now. The road ahead wasn't easy, but it was his road to walk. And he was ready for whatever came next. As he stared at the city lights, Usher realized that the journey he had been on wasn't just about finding the truth, it was about rediscovering himself. He had been lost for a while, caught in the storm of his own choices, but now he had a new sense of direction. The world would keep turning, the rumors would keep swirling, but Usher was no longer defined by them. He was his own person, with his own story to tell. And he was ready to start living it. The sun was just beginning to rise over the city, casting a warm, golden hue across Usher's balcony. He stood there, gazing out at the world below, his mind still lingering on the events of the past few months. Everything had changed in ways he hadn't imagined possible, but now, as the light of a new day broke through the darkness, he felt a quiet sense of resolution. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like a burden. It felt like an opportunity, a chance to rebuild, to redefine himself. The press conference had been a pivotal moment for Usher, a turning point where he not only took control of his narrative but also acknowledged the growth he had undergone. As the media had swarmed him, bombarding him with questions, his calm composure had made it clear that he was no longer the man they had once known. He was someone new, someone who had been through the fire and emerged stronger for it. But despite the success of the conference, Usher knew that the work wasn't over. Healing wasn't a one-time event, it was an ongoing process. He had learned that the hard way. There were still those who would judge him, still those who would never fully understand the choices he had made. But he had come to terms with it. The opinions of others no longer held the power they once did. As he sipped his coffee, Usher's phone buzzed once again, pulling him from his thoughts. The message on the screen was from Diane. "We did it. You're on your way. But remember, this isn't about the press, the media, or even the fans. This is about you and your journey. You've come so far. I'm proud of you." Usher smiled softly, feeling a warmth spread through him. Diane had been there for him when he had felt most alone, reminding him time and time again that his worth wasn't tied to the world's opinion of him. He had come to realize that true strength didn't come from how the world saw him, it came from how he saw himself. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Diddy. "You know, I've been thinking. We both have our scars, but we've also got a lot of good left in us. Let's talk soon. You're on the right path." Usher stared at the message for a long time. Diddy had come a long way since the courtroom. Their relationship was still fragile, still uncertain, but there was something there. A tentative peace. An understanding that, despite everything, they both had something valuable to offer one another. They had been through the worst, and maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to rebuild, not just their professional relationship, but their friendship. For a moment, Usher allowed himself to sit with that thought. He had spent so much time focused on the things he couldn't control, the media's narrative, the judgments of others, the broken pieces of his past. But now, he realized it was time to focus on what he could control, his future. Usher took one last look out at the city before turning away from the balcony. He had a long road ahead of him, but he was no longer afraid of it. The mistakes, the regrets, the pain, they didn't define him anymore. What defined him was the man he was becoming, one decision at a time. That afternoon, Usher decided it was time to get back to what had always been his true love, music. He had been so distracted by the drama of the past year that he had neglected his art. The notes, the rhythms, the melodies, they had been his solace, his escape, and now, they felt like the only thing that could truly help him find peace. He made his way to the recording studio, his footsteps light, almost as if he were walking toward a new chapter of his life. The familiar smell of old wood and mixing equipment greeted him as he stepped inside. The room was just as it had always been, dim, with soft lighting that made everything feel intimate, personal. This was where he had poured his heart out for years, where he had created some of his greatest hits. And today, it felt like the perfect place to start fresh. Usher sat down at the grand piano, his fingers hovering over the keys. For a moment, everything else faded away, the past, the rumors, the noise of the outside world. It was just him, the music, and the raw emotions he had been carrying for so long. His fingers began to move, tentatively at first, but soon with confidence, creating a melody that felt like it came from a deeper place than anything he had written before. As the music flowed through him, Usher realized something profound: this was the real him. Not the celebrity, not the public figure, but the man who found solace in the simple act of creating something beautiful. This was where he had always felt most at home. His phone buzzed again. It was Diane. "I know you're busy, but don't forget to take care of yourself too. It's not all about the grind. You need rest, love, and time to breathe. You've earned it." Usher smiled and typed a quick reply. "Thanks, Diane. I'm learning to do just that. One step at a time." As the music continued to pour out of him, Usher felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons he had learned, the relationships he had mended, and the person he was becoming. The world might not have forgiven him yet, but that was okay. He was learning to forgive himself. Hours passed, and the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the studio. Usher paused, his fingers resting on the keys. He had written something beautiful, something true. A song that spoke to the heart of everything he had been through. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. His journey was far from over, but he had finally taken control of his own story. The future, whatever it held, was his to shape. As Usher walked out of the studio that night, the city lights glimmering in the distance, he knew that he was no longer defined by the past. He had faced his demons, reconciled with his mistakes, and was now ready to embrace the future with open arms. It was a new dawn for him. And this time, he was ready to take it on. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?